I recently traveled with my daughter and others to the southern border to learn and observe the problems our nation is facing and the severity of the decisions made by the Biden administration. It is not the kind of father-daughter trip most people make, but for me, learning as much as I can about one of the most existential threats our nation is facing is imperative. And I always enjoy some time with my kids. Like many things we do in life, it isn't always fun, but it needs to be done. This was not my first trip to the southern border. I have also traveled to the northern border, where similar problems exist, but they are not publicized. First, I want to confirm that our worst fears are evident at the border. One of the most horrifying scenes that I witnessed was a Customs and Border Protection vehicle with the back seat filled with unaccompanied children. These kids were probably 5 to 8 years old, and they were stuffed in the back of the truck like animals. I witnessed a bus stationed at the border crossing that was manned by Border Patrol. The purpose of the bus, from my perspective, was to transport invaders from the area to another processing center. The invaders were frisked by Border Patrol prior to getting aboard the bus. I talked to several of the Border Patrol, but they were hesitant to make any clear statements because they could lose their jobs. But I could tell how they felt from the way they smiled and nodded in agreement as I shared my honest opinion about the abject failure of this administration to protect the border of our nation and its citizens. The reason I've decided to run against Congressman Dan Newhouse is summed up in his voting record. He helped to create the situation at the border by refusing to prioritize our border. Instead, he voted to send over $100 billion to protect Ukrainian borders. Dan Newhouse also voted to give government benefits to 3 million illegal immigrants who are already here. That vote, combined with Biden's worldwide invitation for anyone to freely come to America, created a strong incentive for the invaders that includes some terrorists to continue to come. With thousands of invaders coming across the border each day, our Border Patrol has been reduced to illegal alien processors. They are not patrolling the border. We drove for miles along the border and did not see any patrol actually looking for folks who were entering the country illegally. Many of these invaders ditch their ID once they come across the border because it may not actually be legitimate, may not be from their home country, and may be a liability in the asylum processing system. Something we did see that no one is talking about is a massive canine problem at the border. Invaders come with their dogs and they are unable to take them through the asylum process, so they leave them at or near the border. All of the dogs that we encountered were sweet and friendly, but clearly hungry and uncared for. There is a massive opportunity right now for those that feel called to help these pups.
We're at the border wall in Arizona. No surprise that this is a complete disaster. The things that we've seen so far are absolutely mind-blowing. This is not my first trip to the border, but every single one of these experiences is different, and it's an absolute humanitarian crisis. Regardless of whether or not you look at it just from a purely American standpoint or just a human standpoint, this is an utter disaster, and it's got to be stopped. We've got a tremendous amount of drugs coming across the border that are having a negative effect on our country, especially our young people. We've got human trafficking. Just a few minutes ago, I saw a CBP truck with a bunch of young kids in the back seat, a bunch of young Hispanic kids. And so, you know, your heart just drops when you see that stuff, especially when you see it in person. Talking to some of the Border Patrol, they're definitely not happy about what's going on here at the border, and this truly is a crisis. Now, this particular area does have most of the wall installed, but there are some openings here and there. We're gonna continue visiting a couple of different areas to kind of just learn more about what's going on. But in general, the one thing that I want to say is we don't have as much of a legal problem in terms of the law as much as we have a policy problem. So when one president to the next can change the policies such that we are or we are not following our immigration laws, that's the problem. So I tend to be more of a big picture person, and so I look at what is it that's within our government system that's allowing our current president to subvert the law through executive order or through his policies. And I don't care who the president is, they should not have the ability to do that. A chief executive is responsible in a business or in government to abide by the law and to abide by the rules. And we shouldn't have a chief executive have the authority to be able to thwart those rules and to thwart those laws. And so that's what I want to work on in Congress is let's look at how do we prevent our executive branch from instituting policies that put our country at risk, that put each one of us at risk. Whether it's the border or any other policies, that's not their job. It's the job of Congress to establish the rules and the laws. It's the job of the judicial branch to execute justice when those rules or laws are violated. And it's the job of the executive branch to run the country based on the rules and the laws that are established by Congress. And so it's a real problem. And I'll just say that it is not uncommon or wrong for us to feel a sense of fear in terms of what's going on with our border at this time. There are, as I mentioned, there's drugs coming across the border. We're picking up IDs along here from, who knows where. I just picked up one that was from a country called Senegal, which I've never even heard of before. And I thought I had at least read about all the countries in the world at some point. We don't, supposedly 170 nations coming across the border here. Let me just say this. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it's very clear that the federal government has one primary responsibility. There's lots of things that the government can do for us, state, local, but federal government primarily has the responsibility for keeping us safe. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, it's actually a very short read, but there's a section in there that says, in summary, it says this. It says that in the face of tyranny, men, meaning people, men and women, will do nothing until such time that that tyranny becomes so insufferable that they have to stand up and they throw off the bonds of the tyrannical government and they institute a new government. And this is the key that tells us exactly what the responsibility of the federal government is, that institute a new government that will ensure our future security. The number one responsibility of the federal government is to keep us secure. And the only way you can do that is if you have control of your border. And so whether it's terrorists coming across the border, whether it's drugs coming across the border, whether it's human trafficking that's happening across the border, or just illegal immigration in mass with people that don't have a viable future here in the country. That's what our federal government is supposed to protect us from. Now let's look at this a little bit more. If you think about the ramifications of bringing illegals into our country, right now our laws and our justice system are set up such that if you own a business in this country, you cannot legally hire an illegal alien. So my question is, how is it that those illegals are going to survive? Who's going to feed them? Who's going to house them? You see, this, in my view, is just an avenue for more socialism leading to communism. And yeah, we have some short-minded political leaders that want votes, and they see this avenue of being able to get votes because if they can give people handouts, so they can give people checks, then whatever party is doing that is going to be more likely to be able to get those votes, right? And to keep those votes. That's called socialism. But let's take it a little bit deeper. We know that we have a globalist threat, and those globalists, they want to see a weak America. And if they can challenge the fabric of our society through mass immigration from people that are not coming to America because they want to integrate and be a part of this great country, but because they want all the free stuff, that's a whole different type of immigration than we've ever seen in the history of our country. and it's a problem, and it will literally rip the social fabric of our country apart, and it will re-stitch it into something that that was never intended for our country, and certainly nothing that we ever want to see or live in. And so we have to get control of our border. I came here because this is a huge and important issue in our country right now, and I want to be a part of the solution. And I can promise you that I will work tirelessly from Congress, building relationships with other people in Congress to be able to come up with solutions that we can actually pass to protect our country.
We know that drugs such as fentanyl are flowing across the border, causing over 300 deaths per day, and Washington State is seeing the second worst growth rate in terms of deaths by fentanyl. President Trump highlighted the danger of fentanyl back in 2016. Since then, around 1 million people have died from a fentanyl overdose. It is important to note that although fentanyl is produced into pills primarily in Mexico, it is also assembled in the US and other countries, but the raw materials are coming almost exclusively from China. Human trafficking is more common than any of us want to admit or realize. I know I tend to think that every person in America is above those sorts of acts, but hundreds of thousands of people, including minors, have been ushered into this sex trafficking ring in just the last few years. Having been to the border in the past, I wanted to go to a more remote section in Arizona to get a different perspective on what was happening. It was there, in a remote area without cell coverage, that we encountered around 200 invaders. With no way to call for help and no clue to their intentions, we were suddenly in a very vulnerable situation. Let me explain. We traveled through the gorgeous desert terrain of central southern Arizona, passing thousands of protected saguaro cactus as we made our way to the border. What we found once there was that the Border Protection Team has been transformed into a series of human trafficking units. The migrants do not generally use the normal points of entry, but the invaders that come across and are apprehended are treated the same as the legitimate asylum seekers. Another way to think about it is that all criteria for people entering the country have been removed. The term wide open southern border that we often hear is entirely accurate in terms of the perspective that anyone who wants to come in is allowed in without restriction, and as I mentioned earlier, the world knows it. The migrants are tricked by the cartels into thinking that they need to cross in a random location instead of using one of the established ports of entry. The cartel does this to make money and exert their control. I had a choice. I could leave out of an abundance of caution, or I could stay and learn what I could. So we spread ourselves out and positioned ourselves where it seemed to make the most sense from a safety standpoint and to capture whatever information we could. I stood in the middle of the dirt road alone as the group of invaders approached. They did stop, were generally friendly and inquisitive, so I talked to them for a while. I asked the following questions. Where did you come from? Why are you coming here? Are you meeting friends or family, or do you want to encounter the Border Patrol? Do you plan to work here, or are you only visiting? How long do you plan to stay? The majority of this group was from Mexico, but there were some in the group from Colombia and other countries in Central and South America. I was shocked that not a single person said they were coming to work or to vacation. All of them were coming to vivir, which means to live in Spanish.
Hola. ¿Cómo está?
Bien.
¿Habla inglés o no?
No.
¿Solo español?
Yes.
¿De dónde es? Hola, ¿cómo está?
Bien.
Sí.
Hola.
¿Dónde es nacien?
En Chihuahua.
¿En México?
México.
Sí.
México.
Sí. ¿Aquí para trabajo o
No.
no? ¿Qué?
Bueno, vamos a pedir asilo.
¿Asilo? No entiendo.
No vino por la violencia.
¿Violencia? Huh.
México, danger.
Oh, muy peligroso.
Sí.
Mucho peligroso. No trabajo.
No.
Necesito hacer efectivo, ¿no? ¿Necesito?
Pues no tanto.
No? Solo viva? Solo viva in America.
I am a student for Mexico.
Say again?
I am a student.
Oh, student.
Sí, for Mexico.
Oh, okay.
Pero Mexico, danger.
Is the abierto in the wall? Ahí? It's open? Abierto?
La barda, pues.
Puerto? Oh, over? Climbing? In a ladder? With a ladder?
Yes.
Escalada? Ahí? Cuando? ¿Cuánto? How far?
No sabemos de lo demás.
Much.
Oh, okay.
So much.
What, how does she have not shoes on? How are they have slippers? Hola, ¿cómo está? How do they come so unprepared? The one girl's walking in her socks. Like that is not going to end well. Hola. Señor.
Thank you so much.
Sí.
This was a life transition for them, and it was shocking to me that they carried nothing other than water and the clothes on their back. Some of the children did not have shoes, and many did not have proper clothing for the temperatures they would experience during the trip. There are water stations along the border that are supplied by the government. Invader stations like this are not uncommon along the border because the cartel will instruct the invaders to cross at various different points each time so that the Border Patrol never knows where they may be crossing next. This is a humanitarian crisis on several levels. There are invaders coming from around 170 different countries. Some of these are coming for nefarious purposes. The National Sheriff's Association was recently warned at an event in D.C. by the American intel community that the threat of terrorism in the homeland is higher than it was leading up to the 9/11 attack. We are in the midst of a financial crisis that is leaving many Americans unable to afford gas and groceries. The invaders are facing an even more difficult financial challenge. It is illegal for Americans to employ someone that is not a legal citizen. Therefore, their options will be to get support from their community, turn to crime, return to their home country, or accept government welfare that is currently funded through our state and federal tax dollars. Providing funding to secure our borders is a legitimate use of our tax dollars.
So what were they saying?
So it was tough because I know Spanish, but not. Oh, there's a door right there.
Right there.
But not that well. And so I was just trying to ask them. We're watching hundreds of people coming down this thing, and they told me that there's an escalada in Spanish is a ladder down the wall that's not very far. They said it was cerca. So I was asking them, where are you from? How long are you going to be here? What are you doing?
There's another door.
I asked them, I said, do you want to run into the Custom and Border Protection? And they said, no, we're meeting friends and family.
Two more.
And so just finding out, like, what are you here for? Are you here to work? And they said, no, we just came here because it's safer. In Mexico, it's too dangerous. It's muy peligroso.
Oh,
which
okay.
is, they
Dangerous.
were worried about it being dangerous. But these people are totally ill-equipped. There's
little kids
walking with no shoes on, and just totally not dressed properly for the weather. It's really quite cold.
So
here.
the kids climbed the ladder too?
They must have, or their parents had to carry them. But they said it
Wow.
wasn't very far up here.
So do you think they're like coming in trucks, getting dropped off on this highway right on the other side of the
It
border,
could be.
and then walking?
Yeah, we have seen some big trucks going along that highway. So maybe
They don't seem very exhausted.
No, they
seem very
don't, or
weathered.
dirty at all.
Yeah, so maybe they got dropped off right on the other side, and then they're coming.
There's another
Oh,
water station there.
Yeah, you just have to watch for a ladder. There must be a ladder
There's a
there
hole.
somewhere.
There's the whole.
Every penny spent to provide for and support invaders is by definition a form of socialism.
Let's I find the wall kind of interesting, just the structure of it. Basically, you can tell by looking at it that it was made in panels that are maybe about 6 or 8 feet wide. And there's a big concrete foundation. So the concrete goes, or the metal goes right into the concrete foundation. And it's interesting because you think you'd walk up to this and it would be kind of like tinny, but boy, this is solid. I don't know if they've filled this with concrete or if this is just such thick metal that it just sounds that way. And then every once in a while there'll be a patch panel that they've welded, and I'm assuming that's where the separations in the different panels come, but they've welded those together. And on the other side of where we're at, they've got a bunch of really heavy angle iron. It's like 4x4 angle iron, and they don't always come together perfectly. So I would say this wall isn't a highly refined or tuned wall, but it's, you know, it's functional. You know, it prevents people from passing through it. It's very difficult to cut through it because it's so strong and thick. And then at the top, it's got some pretty heavy panels up there. Now I have seen that there are some new ladders that they're able to throw up there and be able to climb up. And if you're in really good shape, there's been videos of people who can grab this and literally just like put their foot up and just kind of climb up and over it. But you know, they're not going to be able to get masses of people across it like that. You know, my guess is one of the things that somebody will try or start doing at some point here is drones that, you know, lift people and set them over it. But, you know, that's one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with.
There are few winners and many losers in this equation. I have no idea how many American lives will be harmed or lost at the hands of these intentional border policies, but even one life is too much. There are volunteers not paid by the government to pick up the dead bodies of invaders that do not make it. Those responsible must be held accountable, and we must clean up the streets and cities throughout the country so that we can once again enjoy the safety and security that is promised to us by our government that operates under our consent. What I also know is that this is the legacy of my opponent, Dan Newhouse. He would rather send over $100 billion to some distant war in Ukraine while we have an urgent crisis here. A crisis caused by support from him and others like him to provide government benefits to support illegal aliens. That's why it's so important that I defeat him. Once elected, I will seek to limit the latitude that the president and the administration has to ignore or outright violate the laws that are established by Congress. This is precisely what Biden's open border policies do. They are illegal and they are unconstitutional. I will demand the deportation of the invaders. I will prosecute those who purposefully set this trap to harm innocent Americans. Prosecute terrorist invaders. Defund government agencies that provide for invaders. Support common sense reforms that would, for example, require citizenship to be a question on a future census. Openly discourage the option for virtue signaling actions such as a sanctuary state or sanctuary city policies. Encourage merit-based immigration where we invite and encourage the best to come to America. We already know what we will get from the majority of those already elected. It is time to stand together as our Declaration of Independence prescribes. It is time for Americans to take our rightful place on the right side of history. Please join me in this fight against Congressman Dan Newhouse. Sign up to volunteer or donate at jerrodforcongress.com. And if you live in Washington's 4th Congressional District, I'm asking for your help and I'm asking for your vote. God bless you. God bless America. Do not cease to pray for this great country, our leaders, our people, our safety, and that our hearts would once again be turned to God.